Thank you very much, Adrian. Yeah, pitfalls to avoid, things that can spoil your day. The trouble with an event the length of the West Highland is there are an awful lot of things that can go wrong during that distance of race, both in the preparation and in the day itself, and also afterwards, as John and Helen have alluded to. I'm going to do a relatively quick gallop through just a small number of the things that can go wrong. There are loads more. These are the ones that I think are the most important aspects. And then after just a few minutes of this, I'm going to be joined by Jamie Aarons, one of our regular runners, to discuss a particular problem that affected her in a race recently that's reasonably serious, and I really would like you to take on board. So I'm sorry there's not going to be terribly many jokes in this particular sector, just because to me this is quite important. I don't want to see you guys dying on the trail. It's messy. It would involve me in a huge amount of paperwork, and somebody's going to have to scrape up the remains and take them away, and it'll probably be me that has to do it. So please don't do that. Please pay attention to this bit. So that's where we are. In advance of the race, I ask you all to provide a fair bit of background information on your own medical problems that you've experienced in your life, getting to where you are. That could be physical problems, it could be physiological problems, it could be that you need treatment for something. So you're given a questionnaire, you to fill it in. I need it to be honest. Even if there's something quite important going on that you worry might affect your ability to run the race, talk to me about it. Put it in the form, I'll get in touch, we'll discuss it, and we'll establish what additional controls might be needed to get you safely through the length of that race. And if it's impossible, then I'll explain to you why it's impossible. It's rare. It's really rare that I have to say to somebody, I'm sorry, you can't run. It's exceptionally rare. It has happened, but it doesn't usually happen. Most people do manage to get enough controls in place that we can get people into the run and doing it safely. There is risk. This is a risky activity. You could get hurt. You could fall off the trail. You could have an illness along the way that has a serious impact on your life. I want to see you safely at the finish line. Again, joking aside, it is messy if somebody gets very ill in the course of the race, and I don't want to see people get you in a situation that's very difficult to recover from or that has life-changing consequences later on. So there's risk. We try and mitigate that risk as much as we can. We can't control everything. We can't put a defibrillator every 100 meters on the length of the course. That isn't going to happen. So we can't cover every possible risk. We do the best we reasonably can with the resources that we can pull onto the course. So that's where I'm coming from, and that's what I'm trying to do here. The main issues that I want to cover, the one that really causes me the most concern is a thing called rhabdomyolysis. It's the situation where your body, under extreme stress, begins to digest some of its own protein. The protein gets freed up from your muscle tissue, floats around in your bloodstream, and clogs up your kidneys. And your kidneys are a simple filter. They're just a mechanical filter. And when lumps of protein stick in your kidneys stop working. And living without kidneys is actually quite difficult. So rhabdomyolysis is a serious issue. We've not established any way that you can prevent it happening. What we do is have to monitor to look out for it. And the main thing that you do to look out for it is you examine the color of your urine. If your urine that you're producing is brown tinged, slightly cloudy, slightly stringy, Coca-Cola colored, I want to know about it. I want that you reporting yourselves to one of the marshals or the first aiders at the checkpoint, because I want to test that urine. I've got pots, we've got protein testing kit. So we can have a look at that and see if it's established that it's enough of a problem to want to take you to the next step, which is to do some blood tests. We carry blood analysis equipment in the race. We've got 2 sets, 2 different locations. We can get the kit to you relatively quickly, find out if there's a serious problem going on, and if it's serious enough, we would pull you from the race at that point and send you for hospital treatment straight away. This is quite a big step forward in run safety, that we've got the opportunity to do this, because it makes your life noticeably safer if we can get you pulled before you do too much damage, because living without kidneys is really difficult. It doesn't tend to end well. So that's rhabdomyolysis. The NSAID bit, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, that's ibuprofen, naproxen, a whole range of drugs including diclofenac. You must not use these drugs in ultra races. You mustn't, because they have a significant impact on the process that causes rhabdomyolysis. If I catch you with that stuff in your backpack I'm going to pull you. Unless you have pre-authority from me as part of that early process, but in advance of the race. There are some people who have to take these drugs on a routine basis, and they build up a tolerance to them, and that's fine. If I know that you're doing that, that's great, no problems, so long as it's documented in advance of the race. I don't want to find out during the race that you've been taking them as a race day painkiller. It's not appropriate. That's a bit of a lecture. I know it's a bit sort of ouch. It's important. You have to take that one on board. Okay, hyponatremia. A lot of you probably will have heard of this before. That's the situation where you overhydrate. I would far rather see runners lightly underhydrated than over. Overhydration is dangerous. It can cause noticeable problems with your brain. Your brain doesn't work very well when it's overhydrated. It tends to swell up inside the brain case and then you die, and that's messy. Again, so please don't do that. So always err slightly on the side of underhydrating, if anything. I don't want to see people drinking to a program. And I know John and Helen spoke a lot about having a program. What I don't want to see in there is something that says drink 500 millilitres every hour or whatever. That's the last thing you should be doing. It should always be drink to thirst. And that's if you take one message away from this part of the talk tonight, is drink to thirst. Your body's really good at establishing when it needs fluid. It'll work it out for itself. So you're very unlikely to get too dry. The other hippos that I mentioned, hippos are really dangerous things, and you want to try and stay away from them. So hypothermia, hypoglycemia, and hypotension, that's low blood pressure. You want to stay away from those because they can spoil your day. You're all adults. If you don't know what they are, look them up. It's quite straightforward to deal with each of those. If you get hypothermic on this race, then you're doing something slightly wrong. But it does happen. And I deal with hypothermics on this race every year without fail. Some people will get hypoglycemic. They'll have very low blood sugar and have to deal with the consequences. Low blood sugar, you get very confused. You start making mistakes. You trip. You fall over. You get hurt. You get injuries that are not necessary. Back to what James was saying earlier on about nutrition. You need to make sure you've got enough fuel on board. Personally, I'm of the view that fuel early. Fuel lots and fuel early. If you leave it too late to put real food in your stomach's shut down. If you leave it to hour 3 or hour 4 before you have any proper food, your stomach's not working. Your stomach's going into running mode. There's no blood anywhere near it. It'll just throw it back up again. It won't deal with real food. Trauma, blunt force, eyesight. Again, blood sugars. You're not concentrating properly. Your eyesight can go in long runs. We've seen a lot of cases recently of people getting what we call cloudy eye, which is a simple edema on the surface of the eyeball. And if it happens, it's going to spoil your day completely because you're going to stop being able to see. That means you're going to trip over, you're going to get hurt, you're going to leak blood everywhere. That's not a good thing either. I can't say much about chronic inflammation in joints and stress fractures. They'll happen. If you're properly prepared, they're less likely. You know that already, you don't need me to tell you that. Cellulitis, if you don't know what it is, after the event you can look it up, but basically it's an infection in the skin surface. It's nasty. It can progress very rapidly into a serious infection. It's easily treated if it's caught early enough. If you find that you've got a great big patch of bright red skin that's angry and sore, come and see me, or see one of the first aiders and we'll deal with it. We'll get you dealt with. Compartment syndrome, in the case of acute compartment syndrome, that's, again, it's rare, extremely rare. I've only ever seen one. It's very unpleasant indeed. It's pain massively out of kilter with any injuries or with any apparent problem with the tissue. It's nearly always in the calf muscle because it's a closed bag system. It can become inflamed. It can become jammed up. Too much fluid in the area. It becomes swollen and extremely painful. It's excruciatingly painful. But again, if it's identified, you come and see a marshal, come and see a first aider. I'm in a lot of pain, there's something really wrong here, I don't know what it is. We'll try and deal with it. Lyme disease, I don't know, hopefully a few of you saw some of the posts on Facebook in the last few days about ticks. An awful lot of ticks in the Highlands this year. They're out early, it's February, there shouldn't be any ticks at this time of year. They are out. I actually pulled a tick out of a friend at the weekend. When we were out in the hills near Glenshee. Really, really unusual. I don't think I've ever seen ticks at this time of year before. A small percentage of the ticks in the Highlands carry Lyme disease. It's a bacterial infection that is easily treated if you catch it at the start. It's really nasty if it becomes chronic and becomes entrenched within your nervous system, and it's very unpleasant indeed. It can run on for years once it's into your system. If you don't know how to identify risk factors when you've got a tick bite, again, look it up. There's lots of information on Facebook and on the race website, but it's dead easy. If you've got a bite, you've got a tick, it becomes inflamed around the site, or you fall ill with flu-like symptoms within 2 weeks of having had a tick bite, get yourself to your GP and ask for antibiotics. Identify, I am at risk of Lyme disease, I would like some antibiotics, please. No. And vast majority of GPs will give them that to you straight away. They won't ask any questions. They won't even bother with the blood test because it's a waste of time. Blood test isn't accurate enough. Cloudy eye, I mentioned that already. That's the corneal edema. So these are the sort of things that can come up in the course of the event that can mess your day up and make it less likely you get to the finish. Some other thoughts. We've said it already. There's lots of medical advice on the website, lots of experience. People sitting in this room, huge amount of experience here. They'll have seen most of the problems that are likely to come up. And talk to the people around you on the race, talk to the crews that are around you. Go and talk to the first aiders at the checkpoints. If there's something awkward or difficult, they'll get in touch with me, or you can phone me directly. I make myself available for help before, during, after the race. You can phone me up and speak to me about problems that arise. I'll do my best to help sort you out. Our objective is to see you at the finish. At the end of the day, that's it. That's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to stop you. We're not trying to prevent you getting to the finish. We want to see you get there. And again, as James was saying earlier on, mental preparation is such an important part of your fitness. And yes, it is going to hurt. I see people every year in a huge amount of pain and have to decide whether that pain is something that they can cope with, whether it's an indication of a serious problem coming up, or whether it is simply something that they just need to man up and get on with it. And sometimes that's the case. The man up is the only thing that's going to work. And it's very difficult to decide when the man up is the advice they need, or they need a hug, and that's awfully difficult. After the race, post-race collapses are really common at the finish line, particularly at the finish line itself. Low blood pressure tends to be a significant issue for a lot of people. They come in the finish line, they're happy, they're full of the joys of having got there. They stop, they sit down, they maybe have a little bit of something to eat, a little bit of fluid, they start to feel uncomfortable, and they start to get agitated, and they're looking around themselves and they're not quite sure what to do with themselves, and they start trying to stand up. And the first thing that happens, the blood pressure in the body is already really low. They try to stand up, worst thing you could do, smack, down they go. Unfortunately, for all the recent years using the leisure centre, the floor is concrete, so tends to create more problems. Hopefully, at the new place that we're going to use at the Nevis Centre, the floor is wood at least. It's not quite as hard as concrete, because you'll never catch all of them when they fall. You can catch some of them, but never quite catch them all. But these collapses, it happens all the time at the finish line, but it can happen an hour later. It can happen 4 hours later. We've seen people collapse the next night for no obvious reason other than they got really low blood pressure. I've seen a runner who did exactly that, got up, felt uncomfortable in a hotel room, went through to the bathroom thinking he was going to be sick, collapsed, landed on the toilet and punctured a lung, broke ribs and pushed ribs through his lung because he was so unconscious as he dropped, he landed on the toilet bowl. So, don't be on your own is the message. Don't spend too much time on your own. I've seen a runner collapse and briefly stop breathing at the time that they collapsed. I don't want to see that again. We need people to be watched. We need the support crew to keep keeping an eye on the runner. Just, don't let them out of your sight for too long, preferably not at all. And certainly don't let them drive anywhere near a petrol pump. I mentioned at the bottom that worrying conditions can arise later, and what I've got in mind there, I think, goes back to what we've been mentioned earlier on, that rhabdomyolysis can come up during the race and after the race, and it can appear 2 or 3 days after, before it actually becomes an issue. I've seen lots of runners race on Saturday, home on Sunday, I get a phone call on Tuesday. I can't settle, I'm not right. I don't know what it is. I feel ill, I've got a slight temperature, I'm not right. There's always a possibility that they've got rhabdo at this point and their kidneys are not functioning correctly. And that's something that I'll be looking for that runner to go straight to get tested quickly before it gets any worse, because they do need treatment and they need that treatment now. And in a lot of cases, they're going to get admitted to hospital to spend a few days in to get cleaned through, get flushed out properly. So, on that note, Jamie. A couple of things, very, very briefly, I've stuck up on the board, just read through them yourself. What I do like is down the bottom, finisher statistics. Since I started looking after these kind of races, back a few years ago, about 50% runners would finish the West Highland Way. Now the ratio is at least 80% of the runners finish, which is actually better than the ratio of those who get accepted for a place and get to the start line. So if you can get to the start line, you've already overcome quite a big hurdle, because some people won't get to the start line. For whatever reason, illnesses, injuries along the way, family problems, you won't get, some people will not make it to the start line. Get there, you've got at least an 80% chance of making the finish line. That's great, that's a good statistic. And for those who don't know me, I'm Sean. You'll find my phone number in all the material. I'm happy to talk about the problems that arise during races. Now, I'll gallop through all that relatively quickly, because what I want to do now is hand over to Jimmy, who's one of our regular runners. Jimmy encountered a particular problem in the summer of 2017 that I bang on about quite a bit. You heard me talking about it earlier on, rhabdomyolysis. Jimmy had experience with this particular problem, and I'm just going to let her put it in her own words, maybe. Go take the mic.
Sorry, I'm not used to speaking with the mic. I'm Jamie. To start off, I would just say my dirty little secret for this room is that I don't love running. So for those of you here who are doing the race for the first time, you're thinking, I'm not sure this is for me, join the club. My background is as a swimmer. Swimmers, in my experience from California, were inherently not runners. But to avoid obesity and paying lots for a sport, running was a good option. Endurance, kind of ultra running became my go-to later on in life because I did have some endurance from swimming. I am wickedly stubborn. I love lists. It's great that Helen, seeing our spreadsheets, ultra running is all about the lists. Lists were for me. I'm really drawn to the idea of challenges that I'm not sure I can complete. So the West Highland Way, which was one of my very first ultras, that was something that really attracted me to it. So you're in good company. My first ultra was the Fling in 2009. I thought it was going to be a tick box, right? Did my ultra, move on with my life. About 10 years ago nearly, and I'm still here banging on about it. Then 9 years ago, I was exactly where you are sat just now, with my partner and my very anxious support friend, looking to do the West Highland Way for the first time in 2010. So we heard a different medic at that time. It was a Dr. Ellis who did the presentation in 2010 for us first-timers. And Dr. Chris spoke about rhabdo, and he mentioned Coca-Cola pee, and he mentioned peeing like coffee, and he mentioned this, and he mentioned that. And it kind of went in one ear, but luckily didn't go out the other side. Stayed in there somewhere. It also stayed in the head of my friend, Julie, who was crewing for me in 2010. Some of you will know on the trail coming out of Bridge of Orkney checkpoint, you go up a wee hill. I tend to try to use hills as a good point for taking in calories. I really struggle sometimes to eat, so when it's justified walking, I always find that's quite a good time to get some food in. Julie had very kindly gone to the Real Food Cafe. She had come back with some amazing soup for me. She was walking the 100 meters or whatever she was allowed to walk beside me going up this hill. I downed my soup, had an extra cup, a kind of slightly parsnip soupy cup, needed to pee. And Julie said, well, if you're peeing anyway, you might as well pee in a cup and we'll look at it. Such is the length that you support crews. You need to go. I was slightly delusional. Julie wants me to pee in a cup, I'll pee in a cup, whatever. Peed in a cup. It didn't look great, I'm not going to be honest with you. I am going to be honest with you. But then again, it had parsnip soup in it. Kind of stared at it and weren't quite sure, is this rhabdo? Is this coffee thing we heard about? Not sure. I kind of carried on slowly going up the hill. Julie, bless her, ran down the hill with a cup of my pee to my waiting partner, who has lots of backgrounds in medical things, who quickly looked at this cup of disgustingness and said, "Go make her drink something. I think she's just dehydrated. That's not rhabdo." And otherwise, I actually felt fine. I felt absolutely fine. And in fact, it wasn't rhabdo. And I know that now because now I've had rhabdo. So fast forward. Quite a few years, a lot more experience, had probably done 20 ultras or something between 2010 and 2016. In that time, I discovered, coming back to that whole bit about how I don't love running, what I do love is mountaineering, and I love hiking, and I love being out in mountains. So to combine my endurance, my love of lists, and my ability to go long distances at a reasonable pace for a really long time, I started getting into sort of longer races with lots more ups and downs, which brought me to do a race called the Tour de Lyon. Apologies to anyone who speaks French here, because I don't. Tour of the Giants in English, which is a race in Italy, in the Italian Alps. It's about 340 kilometers with around 30,000 meters of ascent. So that's about 210 miles, climbing Everest about 3 times. It's non-stop. You can stop when you want to sleep. Sounded impossible, and that was it. Sounds impossible, right, I'm giving this a bash. Was doing all right, around 200 kilometers. I'd had a bit of a cramp in my quad, kind of intermittently throughout the days before that, because it was on and on and on for days. I hadn't really addressed the cramp, just thought, you're being weak, you just need to get through it. Because I let that cramp go, it miraculously morphed itself into a quad tear. But I was determined I was going to finish. I have 2 kind of go-to mantras, which might help you guys in the future. If I'm struggling, I have a 10-second rule, which is that you can handle anything for 10 seconds. Just get through the next 10 seconds. That's all you have to think about. Talking about chunking. Get through those 10 seconds. And also, my mantra, if you were winning, would you quit? If my answer is no, take another step. My quad was killing me, but if I was winning, I wouldn't have quit. So I spent 140 kilometers like that, and it sucked. And I was way slower. Speaking of times you think you're going to be at checkpoints, it took me ages. It took me days longer, literally days longer than I thought it was going to. But I finished. Wasn't pretty, wasn't even remotely pretty, but I finished. It was very anticlimactic. I hadn't wanted to finish my first TDG like that. So I went back in 2017. I had trained harder. I felt completely prepared. I knew the race because I had done the entire route the year before. And that was it. I was going for it. The race started out pretty much the same as it had the year before. I felt pretty relaxed. I'd gotten a good night's sleep the night before. The first 2 hours or so, I would say it took me much longer than it usually does to get my heart rate, that sort of excitement at the start line. I'm usually pretty good at reining that in. I did struggle with that a bit more in my TDG 2017 experience, but you go straight up a 3,000 meter climb or something. So kind of thing, it's to be expected that you're going to feel some soreness and that your heart rate will be high. And around 80 kilometers, so not terribly far in the grand scheme of things, cramp again in my thigh. And you're right, this time you're going to take time, sort yourself out. Don't let it get to what it was the year before. So I stopped, did not take ibuprofen. I used ibuprofen gel and some other things, sat on a rock and really massaged my thigh, thinking that that was it. And I carried on. About 20 more kilometers. Getting a lot more like hard work than it should have, given I still had over 200 kilometers to go. The more I walked at this point, it felt like in my left quad to start with, and then later in both, like the day before I started TDG, I had also decided to downhill moguls for a good few hours, that I had decided to squat my weight, I don't know, for half a day, and then I decided to start a 340 kilometer race. My quads just had what felt like the worst DOMs I'd ever felt. If I was winning, would I quit? yeah, this isn't very pleasant, but yeah, probably not. Tried to stretch out my quads, and the further I got, the more I had to manually lift my leg to put it on a rock to try and kind of stretch my quad out. Tried phoning a friend from some random hilltop in Italy to tell me to basically get your finger out, just keep going. You're just going through a low, it will pass, because my own self-talk wasn't really working anymore. But, you know, turned Eminem on really loud, who was telling me this was my one shot, you gotta do it, just keep going. Manually moving my legs. It's gonna be a really long 200 kilometers. But, you know, just figured I was being weak and I should just keep going. And around it's probably about 120k, needed to pee. I'd actually been drinking Tailwind, as James was saying, drinking Tailwind pretty regularly. I definitely didn't feel dehydrated. I didn't think that I was dehydrated, given kind of the level of hydration I felt I had been sustaining. But at that point, my quads were so seized, apologies for the graphic images, when I needed to pee, there was no danger of swatting. No danger. So I had to pee like this. And in doing that, you obviously can see the stream of urine. This looks a lot like that Coca-Cola. Start phoning a friend. Hey, can you remind me what Dr. Ellis said about Rhabdo 9 years ago, 8 years ago? Because I'm starting to think maybe. And again, just had that sort of Coca-Cola urine idea in my head. Didn't know anything about the sort of how my thighs had felt, that sort of muscle wastage feeling, as it turns out. So I walked my way to the next aid station, where a nurse who was on site, broken translation, I don't speak a lick of Italian, they spoke very little English, so that was a difficulty. But they got the gist. I peed in a cup there to try and, you know, think, maybe I'm delusional, maybe it is that I'm just dehydrated. Had peed in a cup there, and they don't use the Coca-Cola reference, they talk about variants of wine. So I was somewhere between Pinot and I don't know what. But the nurse there said that because my back didn't hurt, that it couldn't be rhabdo. Lies. But they weren't convinced, basically. And then they brought one of the race medics they brought to the aid station, who had a chat with me, and at this point I was kind of already thinking, you know, if I was winning, would I quit? Yeah, this is now my life we're talking about. The medic told me, why don't you go, the checkpoints have dorms in them, lots of them, because they're alpine huts. Go sleep it off. Let's go have a rest. I'm not even the medic, I'm not so sure, but alright. So I hobbled my way up these stairs, and they sat me down on a bunk bed, and then they left me alone. And I sat there, I did not lay down, sat there, phoned my partner and said, I think if I sleep, I could wake up dead. Like, I'm not sure this is the best advice I've ever been given, so I'm not going to sleep, but I'll stay here and try and rest. And again, still, thankfully, for having attended this session in 2010, I was the one who could say, actually, this isn't right. As it turned out, I think someone downstairs in the checkpoint, while I was wondering how long they were going to leave me there, I suspect did a wee Google search or a bit of Wikipedia action, because suddenly it was blue light special, get Jamie to the nearest hospital. So that was it. It was a 4-wheel drive to a road. It was then a car to an ambulance to a hospital, where I spent the next week. So initially, the hospital staff were nothing but lovely. They immediately, when I told them, well, they didn't even need to see my urine. Initially, just on the basis of what I shared with them, they put me immediately on IV fluids. They also took blood tests immediately. Sent those to the lab, I presume. About 45 minutes later, the same nurse who spoke very good English, which was lucky for me, same nurse came back apologetically that they needed to take bloods again. Yeah, that's fine. Took bloods again. About an hour later, they came back, said, really sorry, so sorry. We need to take them one more time. What I didn't know until the week later when I was discharged was that my, what's called creatine kinase, which is the enzyme that's being released when your muscles are breaking down, that's creatine, your CK levels are the basis for which you're diagnosed with rhabdo and how they determine the severity of it, I suppose. It turned out that I had the highest CK levels that the hospital had ever seen. Woo, won something. It's not worse in the CK level. So actually the multiple blood tests were because the lab thought that there was an error.
You never heard how your CK was?
So they're not sure, because they threw out the first two, they could only extrapolate that it was in 6 figures.
Okay. I'm a biochemist, that's why I'm asking.
What's that?
I'm a biochemist, that's why I'm asking.
Good. Probably could have gotten me treatment more quickly.
Yeah.
But as Sean was saying about the potential risks, if I had been left to listen to the advice, the medical advice that I was being given, in all likelihood I wouldn't have died. What might have happened, or what almost certainly would have happened, is that if I had left that checkpoint on my own, my legs would very soon have given way, and I would have been in a ditch or on the trail somewhere in a much more difficult position to get help. It would have been a helicopter, not a nice little car drive down the windy road. It could have led to much more severe kidney risk than I was in. As it was bad enough that, bearing in mind, I had run 130 kilometers, so I know it wasn't finishing the whole race, but I got a pretty long way. On admission, they put me as nil by mouth. Raging. So luckily a friend managed to sneak me in a croissant. But that was because they weren't sure, what treatment I was going to need and if any kind of dialysis or anything else was going to be required. Luckily it wasn't, but I remained on IV fluids, on complete bed rest, catheter, the whole sexy 9 yards, for a week. So that was my rhabdo experience. And again, I have to, thank having come to this talk in 2010 to know enough to have said, hang on a minute, while I'd really like to finish, this isn't worth my kidneys or my life or the impact on other people if I had attempted to continue. As it was, the treatment that I got in the hospital turned out to be the best recovery for the 130k that I possibly could have asked for, pump full of fluids, bed rest for a week. So I actually did the Offals Ultra 2 weeks after discharge. Didn't tell my GP that. But I did need blood results. Sorry, even once I came back to the UK, I had to get my blood checked every week until my results returned to normal, which was to be expected. So, and actually the hospital in Italy only discharged me because my partner flew out so that they knew that I wasn't going to be on my own as well. So, thanks, Sandy. That's it. That's rhabdo in a nutshell.
Jamie, thank you very much for sharing that with us. There's a lot of useful information in that for everybody. Yes, it's a scary story. It's unusual. Okay, Jamie's a little unusual as well. She's American after all. No, I'll try not to. But there is, there's a serious message in there, and there's also it's rare, but it happens. And that's really the message we're trying to get across to you tonight. I think really that's it for this part of the session. Adrian, are you happy with that?